A man stands above his son and says something disgusting has been born. David says his misfortune started on the day he was born because Cajun was also born. The sword god blesses Cajun, but David was born without a right arm. His mother asked him to die, but he recalls what his father said before he was born. He is his parents' hope, and his father wants him to be better than his brother's child, but he was born without a God's blessing. Several people play with Cajun as he grows, but David's mother leaves him on the floor and says he is slow. As he grows, he is constantly compared to Cajun, and his parents eventually sell him to Cajun's family. Cajun tortures David because he doesn't like him, and David holds his tears because no one comes to help him. Cajun became ruthless as his talent became poisonous and challenged David to combat. David rushes to the stage and attacks him but gets knocked down, and Cajun continues attacking him as he says he is a loser. Time passes and Cajun becomes lazy while David continues to train hard. They battle each other in a tournament, and Cajun pushes David back, but David strikes the ground and blocks his vision. He lands an attack from above that shocks the crows, and the audience sees that Cajun is victorious. David says it took him 29 years to beat Cajun, and the crows cheers for him. Cajun is angry as he realizes he lost, and David remembers how his parents treated him badly. He turns around to walk away, but Cajun stabs him with the sun sword. David realizes he will die because of the sword's mana and loses consciousness. He suddenly wakes up in a dungeon, and the guard says he is lucky because the miracle saint Rayla healed him. He asks David if he signed a contract with the devil and says it is the only way he could defeat Cajun. He then says they found evidence with his parents and his parents confessed, and David realizes they chose Cajun and the Samian family over him. David is thrown into a dungeon and Cajun visits him. He thanks David as he says he became a sword emperor, leaving him to die. Time passes and David is about to die of starvation. He falls and says he doesn't want to die as he passes out, but a light appears and he realizes he won't die. David suddenly finds himself in a strange body, and a man named Charles Adenka yells at him. He grabs David, who is now Vincent, by his right arm, and Vincent wonders what is going on. Charles asks him how long he is going to ignore him, and Vincent grabs his hand. He pushes Charles away and apologizes, but Charles says his son will deal with him. Vincent realizes Charles is like his previous father and wants his son to achieve his failed dreams. Charles leaves as he asks Vincent to wait for the day of the assembly of true swords. Vincent sits and suddenly begins to regain his memories. His mother died when he was born, and his father didn't care about him. Everyone picked on and bullied him, and he was too weak to do anything. He realizes he is reincarnated and goes through a diary but sees only belittling statements. He suddenly hears a strange voice as he stands in the room and wonders who it is. The voice asks Vincent if he is a fool and says he is the body's original owner. The voice reveals himself and asks Vincent to call him Julian. Julian says he is a minor god and intended to call a spirit god, but David crawled in instead. He says he wants to become a true god and must attain numerous achievements. He says that achievements are called callings, and he will become a true god if he completes his calling. Vincent says he isn't interested in his callings and he will be living his life. Julian says Vincent will die if his spiritual energy disappears completely, and Vincent suddenly feels severe pain. Vincent falls to the ground, and Julian shows him his true memories. He sees several people beat and abuse him, and he lays out his plan for revenge. He says he needed to evade surveillance and he wants to observe people who are considered apostle level. Julian asks Vincent if he knows of the archdemon David and hero king Cajun. Vincent is shocked as he hears what he asked and stands up. Julian tells Vincent about archdemon David and hero king Cajun, saying it happened 500 years ago. He says David killed over 10,000 people after escaping prison, and Vincent wonders if he went 500 years into the future. He says he is sure he died in prison 500 years ago. He gets angry as he says Cajun's family forged the story, and Julian realizes he is from that era. He is unaware that Vincent is David and continues the story. Julian says the hero worked with the Sun Sword Emperor, and Vincent realizes he is talking about Arslan. Vincent says he took Arslan as his disciple when he was young. Arslan visited him a few times when he was imprisoned. He promises to recover David's honor and left but never visits again. Arslan is the first patriarch of the Adenka family, and Julian says his achievement is to surpass the Samian family and face the truth. Vincent realizes Arslan left the Flaker family and created the Adenka family for the sake of facing the truth. Julian convinces Vincent to work with him, and Vincent says he will climb above the family that betrayed him. They leave the room, and Vincent wonders how martial arts has changed as he watches some warriors spar. His body suddenly feels heavy, and he falls unconscious. He returns to his room and meditates, saying his body is weak. He suddenly realizes something and calls Julian. Julian emerges, and Vincent asks why he didn't learn swordsmanship. Julian says he was born with a condition that didn't allow him to learn, and Vincent says he has the heavenly exoskeleton. He says the heavenly exoskeleton allows him to store mana in his heart and bones and use it endlessly. Julian is surprised that he had such a gift before leaving his body, and Vincent informs him that Cajun, who they refer to as the Hero King, also possessed a heavenly exoskeleton. Vincent realizes he has Cajun's physiognomy, but says the future differs from his original time. Julian says he cannot link imagery to heart, and Vincent doesn't know what he is talking about. He says it is an imaginary way of storing mana, and Vincent is shocked that they don't store mana in their hearts. Julian says they store mana in the form of stars, representing the martial artist's strength. Vincent realizes an adult in the family creates at least one star. Vincent prepares to store mana in his heart and says it is dangerous. He begins the process, but Julian stops him and asks why he is letting the mana flow everywhere. He says there is a formula to use mana efficiently, and Vincent says they did it by feeling in his time. He calls Julian's body precious and asks him why he didn't treat his body well. He says his physiognomy has been starved of mana for 13 years and his body will die before adulthood if he continues. Vincent meditates in his room and realizes his body might have 10 years to live. He says 10 years is enough for his plan and remembers his suffering. A man bangs on the door, enters the room, and reveals himself to be Wilson, Vincent's servant. Vincent gives Wilson his clothes and instructs him to get fresh clothes. Wilson yells as he asks if Vincent has gone crazy and says he must let the great Chamberlain know and report to the Patriarch. Vincent says Wilson doesn't respect his master and takes the clothes from him. He says he is going to meet the Grand Chamberlain to ask for clothes, and Wilson panics. He takes the clothes from Vincent and leaves as he says he will also clean the room. Vincent says someone put Wilson as his servant so he can solve the issue of a rude and defiant servant, and Julian says Wilson used to be a gang member and a killer. Vincent tells Julian that killers have a certain energy and he doesn't feel it from Wilson. Julian is amazed and asks Vincent how he knows so much about killers, and Vincent says he lived such a life in his previous life. Wilson returns to the room with clean clothes, and he has cleaned the room. He asks Vincent not to make a mess, but Vincent says he will. Vincent instructs Wilson to bring a wooden sword that's around a meter long and gives him certain specifications for the sword. Wilson refuses but changes his mind as Vincent says he will go to the storeroom gatekeeper, an exceptional martial artist and extremely loyal to the family's direct descendants. Wilson grabs Vincent's shoulder, but Vincent flips him and apologizes. He stands up and goes to get the sword but apologizes for slamming the door. Later he returns with the wooden sword and presents it to Vincent. Vincent talks about a man who led a tough life because he had only one arm. He takes the sword from Wilson and Wilson leaves the room. Vincent goes to the training ground and begins training using his left hand. He says the sensation feels good and he is born to be a martial artist, but someone suddenly destroys his practice doll. Revan Adenka introduces himself and says Vincent's mana is low, so he didn't know anyone was using the practice doll. Julian informs Vincent that Charles Adenka is Revan's father and says he is a rising star. Revan says he will fight Vincent in the Assembly of True Swords, and Vincent realizes he is the direct descendant that will fight the Assembly of True Swords winner. Revan tries to provoke Vincent by insulting him, and Vincent says his provocation should have some level of dignity and class. He says Revan is ashamed to martial artists because he destroyed another person's practice doll. Revan points his sword at Vincent as he gets angry, and Julian informs him that Revan is at the level of 2 stars. Vincent says Revan reeks of the sense of inferiority he was raised with. He points his sword at Revan and says the elders of a family would beat someone like him back in his day. Revan says Vincent cannot win but senses that he can cut him at any time. Vincent pulls his sword away and says Vincent is scared. He then reminds Revan that things won't end with swords in the assembly of true swords, and Revan attacks him in anger. Revan rushes to attack Vincent, but Vincent doesn't move and Julian panics. A man emerges and stops Revan as he says he cannot fight him at the moment. He says Vincent will have an excuse to dodge a fight if he wounds him and begs him to hold back. Vincent returns to his room and says he was teaching Revan a lesson for lacking manners. Julian gets annoyed as Vincent sees an old portrait and grabs it. He tells Vincent about traits and blessings and says traits are artificially made from the power analyzed from blessings. Vincent panics as he realizes they can make blessings and says it disrespects the gods. Julian clams him and says no one has received divine punishment. Revan possesses a trait from the Dwarf King's blessing and says its defensive and destructive power is its specialty. Vincent says he must use certain skills to compete against Revan. He continues training, but some people make comments about him. Vice Commander Merlin emerges and tells them not to insult Vincent. Merlin goes to Vincent as he is exhausted and gives him an advanced recovery potion. He says it will help him train and introduces himself. Merlin leaves and wishes for luck to be with Vincent. Vincent uses the potion to recover as he trains and is able to be more efficient. He began to see the path of the sword and was able to successfully cut the practice doll with a clean strike. Vincent is happy as he says his swordsmanship is complete. Wilson carries food as he walks angrily and goes to Vincent's room. He serves Vincent breakfast but has stolen some food from it. Vincent sees food in Wilson's mouth and Wilson realizes he has been caught. Vincent forgives him but tells him not to cross his line and shocks him by speaking with telepathy. He tells Wilson he won't be embarrassed to be owned by Vincent Adenka and should choose to be ruled by fear or loyalty. Wilson leaves the room and says Vincent's coolness is exploding. Meanwhile, Merlin walks into the training area and is shocked as he sees the destroyed practice doll. He wonders what form of martial art Vincent is learning to be able to cut the doll with precision. Vincent puts on his clothes and notices something about them. He tells Wilson that the material isn't good enough to be used by nobles and the food quality is low. He realizes someone is embezzling money, but Wilson doesn't understand what he is saying. Vincent also realizes that someone of higher authority is stealing the money. Revan practices in his room and is angry as he remembers Vincent. His father steps in and informs him there isn't much time until the assembly of true swords. Charles says Revan must defeat Vincent so they can escape a life of poverty and sorrow. Revan realizes his father gets more irritable as the assembly of true swords approaches and says everything will return to normal if he defeats Vincent. Vincent reads about the people participating in the assembly of true swords and Vincent is terrified that Julian has all their personal information. The Miracle Stone is the mana crystal given to the champion. A person's body and mana will grow stronger if they ingest it. Vincent realizes how much Julian wants to win the tournament and says he will give him a far more valuable victory. He calls Wilson and says there is something he has to do for him. Wilson goes to Grand Chamberlain Raels's office and passes a message from Vincent. Vincent asks for the family head to observe the assembly of true swords directly and will prove his worth as a member of the Adenka family. Wilson says it is the cost of embezzling the budget and asks her to make it possible. He panics as he says he is just passing a message and she asks him to leave. Raelsa wonders if Vincent finally understands his intentions. She goes to the family head's room and says Vincent is inviting him to the assembly of swords. She vouches for Vincent and says she will give her head if he doesn't prove himself. She says Vincent has taken advantage of her weakness and the family head is aware of her embezzling the budget. He realizes she embezzled for Vincent's sake and her plan is working. The family head stands up and agrees to attend the assembly of true swords. The day of the assembly of swords arrives and the participants enter the arena. Revan sees that the Patriarch is attending and says he will defeat Vincent in a cool manner. Revan fights an opponent and knocks him down as he destroys his shield. Charles screams in excitement as he watches his son defeat his enemies and people in the audience call Revan a rising star. Vincent watches and says their power is at the level of genius compared to 500 years ago. He then says there is no depth to their martial arts and he doesn't see any experience from them. Revan bows after defeating his enemy and looks at Vincent. The Patriarch watches as he defeats several enemies and Revan says he has on against all his competitors. He says he will fight Vincent and lies that they are old friends. Vincent accepts the fight and walks to the arena. Zeron serves as the referee and Vincent says he has a condition. He says he will only fight with a wooden sword and his left hand. Everyone in the audience wonders what Vincent is doing, and Vincent says he won't move from his current position until Revan's first 3 strikes are completed. Charles yells as he says Vincent is looking for an excuse, but the Patriarch allows it. Zeron starts the fight. Revan rushes at Vincent and he says he should die. Vincent dodges 2 attacks and says great swords aren't used for stabbing as he deflects the sword. Revan is shocked that Vincent deflected his sword, and Vincent reminds him that he hasn't moved after 2 attacks. Revan gets angry and attacks Vincent, but Vincent grabs his hand and throws him to the ground. Revan has made his 3rd attack, and Vincent hasn't moved from his position. Vincent says he will keep his promise to Julian, and it is his turn to attack. The end.